What's up, Myco Squad? Much love. Today we're going to be looking at how to make a super simple jar of liquid culture ready to inoculate. All you need is your jar, some distilled water, some light corn syrup. You can also use honey or dextrose. I use light malt extract powder. We'll be going over a couple different options for sugars to use. A modified jar lid with your filter and self-healing injection port and some foil to cover it. That's pretty much it. You can make it as complicated as you want, but for now we'll just be going over the basics with a few different ingredients. You can experiment on your own and let me know what works best for you. Now for jars, any jar will do. Ball jars, cur jars, these fancy schmancy unmarked jars. Big ones, small ones, it doesn't matter. The large, these quart jars, I don't recommend you filling it up more than 3/4 of the way, so about 600 milliliters. That's a lot of liquid culture unless you're doing things for the masses. It's just absolutely ridiculous. We're gonna be using these smaller ones, which still about 3/4 is gonna be about 300 milliliters on this. Now for these modified jar lids, you don't need something exactly like this as long as it has some kind of a filter and some kind of an ejection port so you can stick your needle in there. You can pick some of these up from the shop or they're easy enough to make your own. I can show you how I make mine. They're pretty easy. All you need is your lid. Make sure it's autoclavable, pressure cookable, Instapottable, something heat resistant. You're gonna need a filter, which I'm using. These are called syringe filters. In this case, we're using it for modified jar lid, but I use the PTFE 0.22 micron filters. You can also get a filter patch that you can use to tape over the hole. You just want some kind of air exchange, allowing the mycelium to breathe, and you don't want to vacuum, any suction when you're drawing up a syringe out of the jar. You don't want it to, create any kind of suction. You want it to be able to breathe, but you don't want the nasties to get in. So that's what the filter is for. The self-healing injection port is what you're going to be, stabbing your needle through with the syringe. These are pretty standard, pretty cheap. And just put one hole on one side, just like there. Drill a bigger hole on the other side for the injection port. Hiya! Good to go. And now that we have our lid with our perfect holes in it, I like to put a little dab of super glue just on the hole where the filter is going to go, just to kind of lock it in place and hold it there. Just like so. Hiya. Not so much necessary with this injection port because it kind of locks itself in there. Just like so. And just give it a little dab of this high temp silicone gasket maker here. All the way around her there. Just like so. And do the same for this filter. Bada bang. Bada boom. Hiya. Doesn't have to look perfect, just has to be functional. Then you're gonna let that dry, let that cure for 24 hours before you autoclave or pressure cook this. And that's gonna be best for the longevity of this reusable modified lid. And now that we have our items, we can make it and bake it, baby. 300 milliliters of your finest distilled agua. Now, if you're using corn syrup or honey or something thick that needs to be stirred in, sometimes it's best to heat up the water and it makes it a little easier to stir. Now, this is totally optional, but I like to use a stir plate and a stir bar when I'm making liquid cultures. The stir bar is just a pill-shaped magnet, really. The stir plate is just a simple little contraption that stirs said magnet. So it breaks up the mycelium when it's all formed and grown. You don't have to open up the jar. One of these bad boys shouldn't cost you any more than 30 bucks on Amazon or wherever. So we're just gonna drop that bar in the water and add our sugars. So in this case, we're gonna be using light corn syrup, Karo syrup. What we're going for is a base that's 4% sugars to the water. So we're using 300 milliliters of water here. Just take 300 times 0.04. We get 12 milliliters or 12 grams. 1 gram is about, you know, give or take, it's close enough to a milliliter. So I have already weighed out here 12 grams, 12 milliliters of light corn syrup. If you don't have a scale, that comes out to just under a tablespoon here. I'd say it's about 88% of a tablespoon, maybe, I don't know. And then you're just gonna stir it up just like that. Good to go. Cap her up, foil her up, and we just put a piece of foil on here to protect that filter so that when water condensates in your autoclave or your pressure cooker or Instapot or whatever, the condensation doesn't fall onto the filter and then become a vector for contamination into your liquid culture. So we just need to sterilize this at 15 psi for about 20 minutes. If you have an Instapot, it might only go up to 11 or 12. You could do, I think, about an hour is usually good for these guys. Let it cool completely overnight and you're good to inoculate. There's a plethora of different options you can use to really beef up your liquid culture with different nutrients and additives. I highly recommend experimentation and trying to find, you know, what works best for you and your own variety of mushroom, whatever you're working with. I do recommend keeping the sugars at about 4% when you're just starting out. So if you're using a liquid sugar like corn syrup or honey or sorghum syrup, you're going to use, like I said, that 4%, about 12 milliliters for a 300 milliliter jar of water. Or if you're using a powdered source like dextrose powder, about 12 grams there. And then you can use different nutrients in trace amounts. A little bit goes a long way with these guys. For instance, like nutritional yeast flakes, pretty cheap, or bacteriological peptones, not so cheap, also smells like dookie. But both of these will really supercharge your liquid cultures and kind of like put it on steroids. Super rapid growth, but at the same time, as with any high nutrient solution, it's going to attract more contamination, and just like the mycelium thrives, contamination also thrives. So if you're making a super complex, super complicated liquid culture, good for you, please report back, but also don't be surprised if you see more contamination in your samples. Now I use light malt extract powder, and I've noticed that the most simple solution is about a gram of light malt extract for every 600 milliliters of water. So we have 300 milliliters here. We're gonna go with the half a gram. I already have this weighed out. If you don't have a scale, that happens to be just over an eighth of a teaspoon, so just a heaping eighth. And for this one, we are going to wanna just go ahead and give it a little stir, a little pre-stir, get that going. Otherwise, if you drop light malt extract in with water, it's gonna cake up almost immediately. Again, this is totally optional. If it does cake up, no biggie. And just get any residue off there. Cap it up. Foil it up. And we're good to go. You wanna make sure there's a couple inches of water in there if you're using a pressure cooker so it doesn't run dry. If you're using an Instapot, probably a little more since you have to run it longer. I use a 23 quart Presto big boy pressure cooker here, and you can stack them up. You can pack them in there as many as you like. This thing can hold 16 pint jars. You want to let your cooker cool completely. I recommend overnight before you open it and inoculate your liquid culture. If the glass jars cool down too quickly, it can cause something called sublimation, which is essentially tiny shards of glass leaching into your culture and then eventually stabbing your mycelium. You don't want mycelium to be stabbed. You want happy mycelium, not stabbed mycelium. But after it's cooled, we're ready to inoculate. All right, now this is where the magic happens. Now we have our jar of liquid culture that's completely cooled. You can go ahead and start stirring it here. All we need to do is wipe down that injection port with some 70% isopropyl alcohol. Good to go here. Now I have a liquid culture, about 10 or 11 milliliters of liquid culture that I've already tested on an agar plate. Looks pretty clean. So we're just going to go ahead and expand this into this liquid culture jar. We'll stir it, and in a couple weeks, we'll be able to have maybe 30 of these syringes. So normally you would do this in a still air box or with the laminar flow hood on. This is gonna cause a little noise for this video, so You get the gist. All you need is just a little bit of mycelium in there. So if you want to preserve the syringe, you can do just say 1 milliliter. That's going to do the trick. If you have a bunch of these laying around or you just feel generous, you can do the whole thing and it'll colonize and expand in this jar a little faster. But about 1 milliliter, just a little speck of mycelium is really all you need. Bada bing, bada boom. All we do is label. Blue oyster, because of course we're only working with gourmets here, and that's exactly what this is just an oyster, just a blue oyster, nothing to see here, just blue oyster. If you are inoculating your liquid culture jar with an agar plate that's already been colonized, which is the way that I recommend doing it, I like to loosen the lid up on this liquid culture just a tad, just so it's not exposed to open air any more than it needs to be. I'll go over sectoring and selectoring on maybe another video here. All you need is just a tiny little rice sized amount. Just drop it in there, seal it back up. Good to go. And just stir it once or twice a day for about a week. Keep that in 70 to 75 degrees. And in about a week, you're gonna end up with a culture that's a little more thick. It's just like this, that you can pull syringes out of. You can keep a jar of uninoculated liquid culture just in room temperature for months and it'll be fine. You can keep your colonized jar of liquid culture in room temperature for a couple weeks, but after it's fully colonized and it's not growing anymore, it's not expanding anymore, I recommend just popping this in the fridge and just taking it out when you need it and just drawing up syringes from there. Much love, my friends. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for watching. You matter. You are loved. You rock. You got this. I'll see you next time. Peace.